balance that Gayatri Chakravertty Spivak uses in her brilliant essay, The Politics of Translation, where she makes these remarks that I was taught in school that the highest mark for the most accurate collection of synonyms strung together in the most proximate syntax was the best translation. I must resist both the solemnity of chaste Victorian poetic prose and the forced simplicity of plain English that have imposed themselves as the norm. And what she says is what the gentleman with whom I was speaking about the art and craft of translation, there is so much of similarity between the two. And so Spivak writes, translation is the most intimate act of reading. It's about this immersion. I surrender to the text when I translate. These songs sung day after day in family chorus before clearer memory began have a peculiar intimacy for me. He's talking about Ram Prasad's songs. Reading and surrendering take on new meanings in each case. The translator earns permission to transgress from the trace of the other before memory in the closest places of the self. Now, in the case, let me congratulate Tania because she has really taken up very challenging texts. She was attracted to them probably by the slimness of the text, but she did not really understand the heaviness of the texts in terms of their content. And congratulations, Tania. And then she was also trying her hand at two different genres. One is a play, where dramatic immediacy must be a precondition for good translation. And the second is a novel, but written in a more dramatic and racy manner. And then, of course, the difficulties of language of Buddhadev Boshu, which already she has anglicized into Basu. Okay, so Buddhadev Boshu, and then when she gave me this homework, I had a lot of other things to do, so I said, Nana, I'm moderate. So she was, and she was not insistent, ki korbe abar teacher, oto beshi to ar barabari kora jay na, mone mone jai bhab. So, yet, only yesterday I read Tapashini and Tarini in English. And I noticed that it is written in a way that the millennial kids will be able to relate to it, because the translation has retained very significant both clarity and readability, and yet whenever there are these verse sections in the translation, they are brilliantly done. There you don't find that sort of colloquialism that sometimes intrudes into the translation. And it's very well done. And of course, in comparison, Rama Padachodhuri's novel was a walk in the park for her, because this one was much more challenging, and you managed to do it very well. And also, when she said I read it as a young person, I was a little scared. At what age? Thankfully, she said college. Yes, because there was a time when it roused a lot of, that sort of a censuring that we Bengalis always try to impose on each other. And this censuring doesn't come from a censor board. We have one at home, in each home. And so there was a lot of reservations about what Buddhadev Boshu had to write. Now, because Buddhadev Boshu belonged to comparative literature, and his, I think, familiarity with both Indian traditional texts and classical texts and Western texts, and also also modern Western texts. I almost, in the translation, I was reading it I somehow felt I was reading a section from probably T.S. Eliot's Wisdom, and especially those poem sections. And also in terms of the dialogue, yes, the dialogue will show how secular Buddhadev Boshu is, despite the fact that he's handling a Puranic text. And also, finally, I would like to just end with also a feeling that Eliot's Rock, another very, very famous creation of T.S. Eliot, but I felt that there was some sort of a resonance, and which sometimes we call the anxiety of influence. Shantanu would know that because he also traverses both the Western literature as well as the literature of the global South, and very specifically Indian literature, and not only urban, of the urban areas, but into the more remote areas of the whole of the country. So on this note, I would first invite the person who has been referred to since we started this program, because the person who really led us into serious translation was Ramkumar Mukhopadhyay. So I will invite Ramkumar, who made the English department faculty members become translators in 2014, and 10 years later also we are doing the same work. Thank you so much.
নমস্কার। আমি এটা দেখেছি যে একজন একটা বই অনুবাদ করেছে, একদিনে আর 10টা বই রিলিজ হয়েছে। এটাও দেখেছি যে দুজনে একটা বই অনুবাদ করেছে, রিলিজ হয়েছে। একজনে দুটো বই অনুবাদ করেছে, একদিনে রিলিজ হচ্ছে। Something very unique. And Bengal has a very long tradition of translation. There are at least 30 translations of the Ramayana, at least 25 translations of the Mahabharata. There are so many translations of the Bhagavata, and even some other texts, some other Puranas. But our translators, they translated the text in their own ways. Just I'll give one example. Actually, I have derived my name Ramkumar from our family deity, that is Sitaram. So every day we put a lot of tulsi leaf and sandalwood paste on Rama and Sita, and now you'll not be able to see the bow and the arrow. Total Muslimite God. Actually, Kashiram Kirtivasuda, he was a Vaishnavite. And when he translated the Ramayana, he did not follow the way which Valmiki followed. Then he changed the characters into Bengalis. Sita is like a Bengali, Rama is very docile, and Sita is like a Bengali wife. And there are some very interesting descriptions there. If you read the description of Ajodhya, you will see there all kinds of Bengal trees, mango, jackfruit, everything. Those do not grow in Ajodhya. But in the translation, all these things, Kirti was planted in his text. That happened when he was translating the Ramayana. And there is another very interesting text, that is Maladhar Boshu. Maladhar Boshu, actually he died before Chaitanya was born. But Chaitanya visited his home, Maladhar Boshu's home. Maladhar Boshu wrote a beautiful translated text, Bhagavata, that is Sri Krishna Vijay. And there is a particular chapter, I just mentioned one, that at noon time, Jashoda is going to the bank of the river. There, young Krishna is playing, and Jashoda is telling, come back home and have rice. It was not there in the original. In the original, it was only milk and butter and all these things. But the Bengali translator, he will make him eat rice. That was the translation, Mayadhav's translation of Bhagavata. And so many other examples I can give. And all these important figures during the Renaissance period, like Raman Rai. Ram Mohan Rai translated a number of Upanishads in 1915, 1916, 1917. And then Vidyasagar translated Shakuntala and other texts. Then Rabindranath translated also so many texts. So we have a rich and long tradition of translation here in Bengal. And Tania is following the same path. And Tania has, particularly because if someone asks me to say something about poetry, I always say that is not my subject because I write short stories and novels. I can speak on that, but not on. But Tania has translated a novel and a play, and it's a poetic play. Ramapada Chaudhuri is rather simple because his sentences are very short. The book is of nearly 120 pages and not that difficult. And the language is informal in his text. The style is informal. But Tapasyan Tarangini is a very difficult text. Because in this text there are at least 4 styles of narration. Because the central character, he is speaking in one style. Then the priest, family's priest, he is describing everything in a different way. And then Tarangini is speaking in a different way. At least there are 4 styles in the same text. But Tania has managed the thing so well because it reads like the original. Tania's translation, when I was reading the text, I didn't feel that it was translation. It read like the original. That is, and her English is, another proper guidance of Sangyupta Dasgupta because, I have read because Professor Sangyupta Dasgupta, she's a very hard taskmaster, I know. Folk narratives of India, when the big text was translated with some 15 translators, it's a big thing. And Tania has beautifully translated the text. I believe that our readers, Bengali readers, they will be happy to read both the books. And Tania has mentioned when she was speaking here that they are doing a great job for the Bengali language. Because at one point of time, actually, I requested from Dipendra Chakravertty, our teacher, that you do something for Sahitya Academy. Then he translated Putul Nachi Ridikotha. Then Sudeshnathi, I requested her. Then she translated Olig Manush. Then I requested Sangyupta Dasgupta. Then she first translated Moni Mahesh. And our Bhavata Chatterjee, he was also involved in our translation activities. And so, the eminent scholars from the English department, they have been involved in the translation activities of the Sahitya Academy and some other organization. It is good for the Bengali writers of the Bengali language that they are now able to, that they are now known outside Bengal for these translations only. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ramkumar. That was insightful, informative, and told us a lot about how translations, the tradition of Indian translation, how it has inspired many of some of the leading creative writers to try their hand in translation. May I now invite Shantanu Dasgupta, who teaches in the department that Buddhadev Boshu set up in the Jadavpur University. Comparative literature, which Rabindranath, when he talked about Vishwa Sahitya, he translated Vishwa Sahitya as comparative literature. One wondered whether it was the lack of a dictionary at hand or whether there was much more implied, because nowadays comparative literature is not something that is segregated as a department. We have an extension of comparative literature which calls itself world literature. So Shantanu combines it all and he leads a very, very dynamic center for translation at the Jadavpur University, and he will talk about the translations of Tania Chakravertty. Talk about it, yeah? Don't dissect.
Thank you, Shanmugta. Very grateful to Tania and the organizers for asking me to speak here. I'll start with something that Tania had mentioned. She was wondering whether at the end of this session, after reading the books, we would say ba or not. Now the word ba, it has one meaning in English and it has another meaning in Bangla. In English, it is a word that signifies disparagement, disapproval. In Bangla, it relates to bahoba dewa, that is to commend something. And after reading these two translations, I have no doubt that all of us will be saying ba in Bangla rather than in English. Very challenging text to translate, Buddhadeva Boshu's play. And the two texts are very different, as many of you have mentioned, because one is so extremely poetic, full of passion in a certain way, filled with similes, metaphors, a lot of hyperbole, high-strung emotions. And the other, of course, written by someone who has been a journalist, who uses his specific brand of prose, which is racy, short, succinct sentences, very prosaic, and so on and so forth. So ideally, translations of these two very different kinds of texts should read differently. And I think that has come out very, very clearly as a reader. The two read very differently. It's clear that the translator seems to have immersed herself into those two texts and donned the mantle of those two different texts. Buddhadeva Boshu is a challenge to translate. Orunabhu Sinha, I remember saying recently that perhaps the most challenging writer to translate for him is Buddhadeva Boshu. So that itself is a very brave effort. I think most of the things that I had jotted down here in small handwriting have already been said by so many of you. So I'll focus on what is my favorite part of a book that I read in translation, which is the end. The last 8 pages of The Hermit and Torungeni. I'm talking about the notes and glossary. Because that is the section which I think gives us a clear idea of what the translator is trying to do with the translation. It gives us an idea of the position, the location, the understanding of the translator. And one thing that comes out very remarkably in the notes and glossary section is that there is a very clear policy, a cogent approach to the idea of translation here. Because very often we come across translations of Indian literature in English which display a certain amount of inconsistency. Certain words are glossed, certain words are not, certain words are explained prescriptively. In some sentences, we are seated down to lunch to have luchi with fried aubergine slices. Dessert might consist of shandesh, rashagolla, and then rice pudding for lunch. So that betrays a kind of a conflict in the idea of translation. I think there's a very clear consistency in the translation as is evident from the notes and glossary. Culture specificity, mythical references, once again the translator seems to have a very clear approach to this. Things like veena, mridanga, these are words that are used in the original text and they are retained like that. There is no attempt to explain these in terms of European instruments. Sometimes we've come across books of translation where you see the word Trishul being glossed as the weapon of Zeus and Poseidon. This is a far cry from that. It's a very clear policy that is employed. So words like karma, swayamvar, prohor, these are all retained in the translation. Some of them are glossed where they're needed. What happens is when you use the word prohor and retain the word prohor as a translator, you're not just talking about the hourly system, you're also talking about a certain, a different value system, a different tradition which is indigenous. So the background, the context of the original, I think, comes across very well in these translations. And at the same time, there are readers and there are readers. Different readers have different needs. So there are mythical references which are also annotated and glossed and explained for readers who might not share the culture code of the original. So things like references to Savitri, Ardhanarishwar, Manamotho, Madhusudhan, these are all names that are retained but also explained for readers who might need these explanations. So I think very interesting and exciting and very useful translations. And I have no doubt that these are books which will shortly enter the syllabi of literature departments. I think that's all that I can say right now officially. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shantanu, and I notice that Tania is beaming. And I do not want to make a comparison with a particular cat. Yes? And the appreciation coming from two of the best readers of translation means that the book has really arrived. And as Shantanu said, that it can get into the syllabi. And I hope it will, because that is the intention of translation. You don't just translate and put it on a bookshelf. It has to be read, which means it demands readers. And it is this demand that the translations have been able to create. I will now I was thinking of inviting Ashok Vishwanathan, but he pleases me a lot. Professor Geraldine Forbes will also agree. He is all for gender balance. He said no, first Nobobalati. There you are, Nobobalati.
Can I stand up and speak?
Of course, this is a free nation. Rosa Parks.
Let me first laud Tania for her wonderful choice of 2 books and the beautiful translation. Let her have a big hand for it. A good book of translation resonates with the original words of the translated text. Here, 2 cultures merge together. Professor Pradeep Acharya, who is another translator, he refers to translation not by this name, but by another word which he calls transference, as it is called by him, according to the Assamese word for it, which is called bhangoni. Bhangoni means to break the words and understand. As I read Tania's translated works, I could feel how the work must have been a natural flow in her veins and arteries when it flowed with no anxiety, and thus both the works turned out to be excellently translated pieces. People who speak and study and work in their mother tongue do not have the credit of holding their own fort. Nevertheless, the new generation of writers have the credit of holding forth in more than a couple of languages. Thus, genre is no longer governed by mere aesthetics, but by ideology. With her 2 works, she has brought in the world of creation a rich gift of literature As it is, English has replaced Latin as a world language, and Rabindranath had launched the concept of the universal man. Indian literature, written in different languages, held by us as one. It is the varied hued tinted glass of a door which we look forward to enter with deep longing. Literature is a contingent phenomenon produced through discourse. The process is socially connected and controlled the flow of knowledge and power in a community. In a social semiosis, the social production of meaning is seen and gauged, and we find in it the search for a textual strategy. Discourses on them impinge heavily on genres, and this learning on genres influence critics and their assessment of individual pieces. As I was reading the two books, I found in the novel Bari Bodle Jai a small passage, খুঁতখাত ঠুংঠাং শব্দ শোনা যাচ্ছে, কোথাও কখনো বালতি টানার কিংবা জল ঢালার শব্দ, কখনো হাড়ি কড়াই খুন্তির। এই সময় প্রীতির কাজের কি একটা ঠিকই ঝি একদিকে, অন্যদিকে একজন রান্নার কাজের জন্য সুধা তাদের উপর নানা রকম নির্দেশ দিতে দিতে প্রীতি নিজেও ছোটাছুটি করে কাজ করে। কি কাজ তা অবশ্য ধ্রুব ঠিক জানে না, জানার চেষ্টাও করে না। এই সময়টা সমস্ত বাড়িটার যেন এক জট পাকানো অবস্থা। এই সময়টা ধ্রুব একটু দূরে সরে থাকতে চায়, এমনকি এক কাপ চায়ের কথা বলতেও দ্বিধা। This is a beautiful passage, and I was very curious to know what did Tania write about this. So Tania has, of course, very beautifully translated it. This is a picture of domesticity, and the crisis that arises on the home front has been beautifully brought out by her. And of course, it needs a lot of care, and Dhruva wouldn't care to get near it. It is much beyond him. After that, let me come a little bit to the hermit and Tarangini. Tarangini এগিয়ে এসে, তুমি কি আশ্রমে ফিরে যাচ্ছ না? ঋষশৃঙ্গ, কেউ কি কোথাও ফিরে যেতে পারে তরঙ্গিনী? আমরা যখনই যেখানে যাই সেই দেশেই নূতন। আমার সেই আশ্রম আজ লুপ্ত হয়ে গিয়েছে, আজ আমি লুপ্ত হয়ে গিয়েছি, আমাকে সব নতুন করে ফিরে পেতে হবে। আমার গন্তব্য আমি জানি না, কিন্তু হয়তো তোমারও গন্তব্য, যার সম্বন্ধে তুমি এখানে এসেছিলে, হয়তো তা আমারও সন্ধান। This is so nice and very touching, very meaningful, and Tania has written, can anyone return anyway? Tarangini, whichever land we visit becomes a new land for us. The hermitage has become defunct for me. The old self of mine has become defunct. I will have to get back everything afresh. I do not know what my destination is, but whatever it is, it could be your destination too. But you will have to seek your own path, Tarangini. So, the deep inner beauty of the words spoken by ऋषशृंगा has been beautifully brought out, and so has his realization that the two of them have the same impulse, same quest, same desire. The translation has been beautiful and has not affected the original in thought, flow, or sentiments. The beautiful epic kind of a narrative has not been tarnished by a more uncouth or unsentimental English flow. It has been preserved. Translation is a disciplinary site, and the concept that we hold of language being communication has been very beautifully presented. The empirical reality, the linguistic propriety, the pragmatic idolization is all there in the target language. Translation helps literature to circulate as a translator spins language out of his inner self. Sorry, I'm using his. The translator's respect for the work at hand aids the provincial literature to get into a global platform. With instinct and finesse, the translator is a class of artists who has moved on to the society he lives in and the society he wishes to offer his translation to. His sense of tradition and values play a role with aplomb. It is comforting that good translation have a level of confidence and a vision and sufficient art to handle the translation of the original. Tania handles the vision of the original work with great comfort. Translation requires that comfort zone, and this is possible only when the targeted language is within one's hold and the personal element of the translator's vision merges with that of the original writer. Exploration of the layers of the psyche develops rhythmic cadence in prose or poetry, smooth and relative. There is a swell wave of understanding. In a silent mode, they vibe through and through, deep and functioning. As a translator myself of 7 years, I feel that translation is a very lonely occupation, a solitary time when I keep to myself. It is thus that people feel surprised that I finished a 500+ novel, all written and edited for the press in 3+ months. Intrusion from the outside world affects the translator. Translation is a challenge that the translator picks up effortlessly, as Tania has done. She did not hobble, but stepped beautifully and meaningfully. In The Hermit and Tarangini, I found the detailing as amazingly true to life, bringing out the immersive meaning, the depth of words and expressions, the labyrinth of thoughts and absorption, all aglow. The play and her novel is a natural flow and proves that a translator shares something far more than an inner vibe. The Hermit and Tarangini dates back to an ancient period of hermetic seclusion. Desh was a reputed magazine of the time, 1966. It took 5 issues for the complete play to be published, and here the Rishishringa Chronicle which happens to be one of the oldest Purans, is in 4 succinct acts. We find here a courtesan's heart faced with true genuine love for a young hermit. She walks away from a life of creature comfort and luxury of wealth and admiration to a man who did not know that such a creature as a woman exists. In the French philosopher Roland Barthes calls cameras as clocks for seeing that arrest time, and translation is said to be a form of communication across generations. In Bari Bodle Jai, or Dwellings Change, I feel that the translating a novel is for the translator the same as driving a car. While driving a car, you change gears, you steer, you press the brakes, you press the accelerator, you focus the lights. Similarly, in translation, we too need to heed to a great many things. Words like dalal or bhari are instances, and Tania has brought out even the feeling of inferiority complex of a tenant, which is honestly a very vicious circle. Besides the characters and thoughts having the habit of prowling about, the mention of the day a son cannot look at his parents' face, one knows that he is either ashamed or he doesn't care. This is something very native in feeling, but even in English, the sentiments are held back and they are beautifully understood. Similarly, Dwellings Change lays out the graphic truths, and not about mere sentiment, but a reality that adds salt to the festering wounds. Each of us in this world are in our mental prison captives, and Tania's translation has brought it out beautifully.
Thank you, Navamalati. And Navamalati, as all of you know, is a prolific translator. She translates 6 books, each of 600 pages in 1 year. And so, Navamalati, when she is able to appreciate Tania, we understand that here is a translator, a fellow translator's very positive response to Tania's translations of the 2 books that we are that have just been launched. Now, may I invite Ashok Vishwanathan, and Tania has already asked you whether these translations would also be stage worthy. So I would like you to comment on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ranjukta Di. Thank you to IPPL for having me here. I'll be very brief because we're running out of time. I can understand that. So, a few points very quickly. The first thing is that translation is certainly not an easy job by any stretch of imagination. Because translation is not the direct transference from one language to the other. To give you a quick example of the extreme, like the other example that was stated. Now, Jivanananda Das's Bonulata Shen has been translated so many times. One of the most extreme translations, I'll give you a few lines, might be interesting. The last verse, Shomosto diner sheshe, shishirer shobder moto shondha ashe. ডানায় রৌদ্রের গন্ধ মুছে ফেলে চিল পৃথিবীর সব রং নিভে গেলে পাণ্ডুলিপি করে আয়োজন তখন গল্পের তরে জোনাকির রঙে ঝিলমিল সব পাখি ঘরে আসে সব নদী ফুরায় এ জীবনের সব লেনদেন থাকে শুধু অন্ধকার মুখোমুখি বসিবার বনলতা সেন At last, when the golden bird and its evening together vanish into the return of firefly mist, and fables replace the meaning of twilight with darkness, earth stops. I watch the transactions of all life come faltering to an incomplete end, face unfurled in my fairy tale world without my Bonulata Shen. I think it's a remarkable translation, but it is a translation which goes to the feeling rather than the transference of the words. The translation is by Mukul Sharma. He calls it Bonulata Shen, or One More Time with Feeling, brought out by Writers' Workshop way back in the 80s. Now that is the question. Whether your translation is going to provide something different, and you are allowed to do that. Ram Kumar Babu said something very interesting. When Krittibash translated Balmiki's Ramayana, he made the characters Bangali, which is valid, which is quite possible. That's also art. In fact, the cuisine was uniquely Bangali, not just the rice, the dodhi, the poyodi. Those are all detailed. I've done a recent filming of some of these texts. He also mentioned Maladhar Boshu. Imagine the Sri Krishna Kirtan, আবারও বাংলাতে বলতে হচ্ছে, সেখানে কিন্তু প্রথম আদি রসকে আনা হয়েছিল সামনে। এই আদি রসাত্মক যে প্রক্ষেপণ, the sexual side to these ancient texts, a la Stosur, who also uses such words with alacrity, was something that was brought to the fore because of these translations. And when I make a film, that's also a translation. I'm transferring it on celluloid. Ramapada Chaudhuri is one writer whom you've translated very well, Tania, but who has also lent himself brilliantly to cinema. Consider his Beej, Ek Din Achanak, his J.J. Khane Dadiye, which is one of the most brilliant novels in Bangla literature. He lends himself to that kind of, interpretation. His Akoni. Once again, I agree when people say that he's a very contemporary writer, the language of the moment, and you've been able to achieve that in Dwellings Change. This is my first point, so congratulations to you for that. But I have just one slight difference. I believe, as Eliot said, that the greatest drama is expressed in poetry. Who can forget a Shakespeare? Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice begins with, "In sooth, I know not why I am so sad. It wearies me. You say it wearies you. But how I caught it, found it, or came by it, what stuff 'tis made of, whereof 'tis born, I am to learn. And such a want which sadness makes of me, that I have much ado to know myself." It's written in iambic pentameter, each verse, as is Meghnadbog. Now, much of it, there is verse, but I would have liked it more if more of the versification were there. Some of the parts have become a little too prosaic. But one of the greatness of Buddhadev Boshu's plays, এগুলো কাব্যনাট্য, এর মধ্যে কাব্যিক মেজাজটা কিন্তু ভীষণ। I'm just giving you a small example of a translation of Tagore by Tagore. You might find it interesting. Just hold it a minute. Explain what I'm trying to say. The theme is very similar to Tapashya Tarangini. It's from The Fugitive, Part 3. It's called In the Depths of. Now listen to it. In the depths of the forest, the ascetic practiced penance. With fast closed eyes, he intended to deserve paradise. But the girl who gathered twigs brought him fruits in her skirt and water from the stream in cups made of leaves. The days went on, and his penance grew harsher, till the fruits remained untasted, the water untouched, and the girl who gathered twigs was sad. The Lord of Paradise heard that a man had dared to aspire to be as the gods. Time after time he had fought the Titans who were his peers and kept them out of his kingdom, yet he feared a man whose power was that of suffering. But he knew the ways of mortals, and he planned a temptation to decoy this creature of dust away from his adventure. A breath from paradise kissed the limbs of the girl who gathered twigs, and her youth ached with a sudden rapture of beauty, and her thoughts hummed like the bees of a rifled hive. When he opened his eyes in order to start on this journey, the girl appeared to him like a verse familiar, yet forgotten, and which an added melody made strange. The ascetic rose from his seat and told her it was time he left the forest. "But why rob me of my chance to serve you?" she asked, with tears in her eyes. He sat down again, thought for long, and remained where he was. That night, remorse kept the girl awake. She began to dread her power and hate her triumph, yet her mind tossed on the waves of turbulent delight. In the morning, she came and saluted the ascetic and asked his blessing, saying she must leave him. He gazed on her face in silence and said, "Go, and may your wish be fulfilled." For years he sat alone till his penance was complete. The Lord of the Immortals came down to tell him that he had won paradise. "I no longer need it," said he. The god asked him what greater reward he desired. "I want the girl who gathered twigs." That's Tagore, and that's Tagore in translation. Brilliant, and I'm sure Buddhadev Boshu is influenced by this, if you can make out. And the translation is by someone whose English has been questioned by many, but he could still write very well. Much of Tagore's translations, despite the kind of aspersions that have been cast on him, could do it well. But I would say, to conclude, that The Hermit and Tarangini is a very good effort. It is very difficult to bring out the resonances of this text, the mood and the meter, the milieu and the metaphor, and you've been able to do it, and for that you deserve congratulations. With regard to Ramapada Chaudhary, again you're successful. The language, as has been already mentioned by Sanjukta Di, and Sanjukta Di made another very important comment which I must mention. Yes, The Hermit and Tarangini is profoundly influenced by Eliot too. It is the wasteland. Only, I think, Buddhadev has written somewhere, or some people have said of Buddhadev, that whereas Eliot had to come right to the end of his great epic poem to finally find out that the real answer lay in the Eastern philosophy, and he quotes, the Damyata, Dayadvam. Right, but by then it's too late. Already civilization is destroyed. But here, in Buddhadev, the vision is there. There's a vision. So in that sense, although he's influenced by Eliot, he provides that vision, and that vision is intact in your translation. So, and about Ramapada Chaudhary, if you see his Akoni, the film, or if you read the book, very contemporary, language is absolutely colloquial, which you brought to the fore. It's very readable, but it's by no means simple. Otherwise, he wouldn't have won the Sahitya Academy Award for this Dwellings Change. It is a very political novel, a socio-political text, and it mirrors the uncertainty of the times. সেই সময়ের যে অস্থিরতা, ভয়ঙ্কর অস্থিরতা, সেটা কিন্তু এর মধ্যে বিরাজমান। আমি শেষ করছি একটা গল্প বলে, যেটা বাংলাতেই বলতে হবে। সেটা হচ্ছে এটা নাটক করা যাবে কিনা, যে প্রশ্ন করেছেন। আমি একটা গল্প দিয়ে এটা বলছি, যে একবার শিশির ভাদুড়িকে রবীন্দ্রনাথ দেখেছিলেন। আপনারা হয়তো জানেন, সুনীল গাঙ্গুলি এটা নিয়ে লিখেছেন। দেখেছেন শান্তিনিকেতনে, বলছেন যে শিশির তুমি খুব ভালো নাটক করছো। উনি দেখতে গিয়েছিলেন। তখন শিশিরবাবু শরৎচন্দ্রের সঙ্গে কাজ করছেন, এবং শরৎচন্দ্র বেশিরভাগ নাট্যরূপগুলো দিচ্ছেন। বলে, তুমি আমার একটা নাটক করো, আমি নাটকটা পড়ে শোনাচ্ছি। গোড়ায় গলদ, একটা হাস্যরস পূর্ণ নাটক পড়ে শোনালেন। বলে, কিরম লাগলো? তখন এই দুপুর হয়েছে শান্তিনিকেতনে। তো শিশিরবাবু বলেন, খুব ভালো লেগেছে, কিন্তু এটা না পড়তে খুব ভালো লাগছে, কিন্তু এটা কি নাটক করা যাবে? তো এই কথাটা কিন্তু গুরুদেবের পছন্দ হলো না। উনি অকস্মাৎই ঘর থেকে বেরিয়ে গেলেন, এবং শিশিরবাবু খারাপ লাগলো যে আমি কি বলে ফেললাম। গুরুদেবের সামনে থেকে কেউ বলে না, কি খারাপ বললাম, আমরা চলে যাই এবং কেটে পড়ি। বন্ধু ছিল সঙ্গে, বলে না, গুরুদেব বলেছেন আপনি থেকে যান, রাত্রিটা এখানেই থাকবেন। তারপরে ভোর সকালে গুরুদেব ডেকেছে, আমি ওটা আরেকবার লিখেছি, এবার একটু শোনো তো। এবার সেই নাটকটা আবার উনি পুরো পড়ে শোনালেন। এখন নাম দিয়েছেন শেষ রক্ষা। এবার এটা হয়েছে কি, বলে এটা অসাধারণ হয়েছে। বুড়ায় গলত ছিল কিন্তু শেষ রক্ষাটা হলো তো। থ্যাংক ইউ।
Thank you, Ashok Vishwanathan. He referred to films being translations also, and we know about intersemiotic translation. And then I'm so glad he referred to Tagore also, because I was also thinking about Potita and Obishar, but age is telling on me. Bhule gelam. So I'm so glad that you brought it all back. And now I would invite Amita Rai, who is also a brilliant translator. Her very first translation of Abanindranath's Khirer Putul was shortlisted for the Sahitya Academy Translation Prize, which is no mean a credit. And her Nalok and Shokuntala has recently been, which she has translated, has recently been published and was available at the book fair. And I think almost everybody got a copy, or Amita saw to it that they did. And so I would now invite Amita to say a few words as a practicing translator about Tania's books, the two of them, Dwellings Change and The Hermit and Tarangi.
Good evening. First of all, congratulations and cheers to Tania for these two brilliant translations. I would, and also thank you, Tania, for having me over here. Well, I'm going to dwell upon Dwellings Change. I have two reasons for this. You know, I have an affinity for Ramapada Chaudhuri, affinity with her works or for him, because of two reasons. First of all, I'm his admirer. I love his works. As Ashok Vishwanath has just now said, he's a contemporary writer, and many of his books have been translated into movies, like Ek Doctor Ki Maut, then Bon Pala Chirpada Boli, and yes, and so I'm just his admirer. This is one reason. And the other reason that I can see Tanya smiling is because we share the same birthplace, that is Kharagpur. We both have been born and brought up in the same place, Kharagpur, which is a railway cosmopolitan township. And I read Pratham Prahar. I think it is probably his very first novel when I was quite young. Ramapada's novel, Pratham Prahar, and it discusses, it delineates, it focuses on Kharagpur. The transition of Kharagpur from, Ramapada Chaudhuri was born in the colonial period, I think in somewhere in 20s, 1922 or something. So when he wrote Pratham Prahar, when he was a child, and when he grew up, the same picture of Kharagpur I could visualize. I being born after independence, I could visualize the same picture of Kharagpur when I read that book, Pratham Prahar. Well, first of all, I would like to dwell upon Dwellings Change, the title. Well, do dwellings only change in this novel? No, it's not just the dwellings. It's, here the protagonist, Dhruvo. First of all, he lives in a joint family, and because of some problems, he leaves the joint family and shifts to a rented flat. You know, it becomes a nuclear family over there. And then he becomes, in the end, he himself becomes house owner. And during this transition, right from the first to the last, we find the protagonist's change in attitude also. We see the change in his attitude, his perspectives, and everything. So dwellings only don't change. Even the perspectives over here of the protagonist change. As the very last line, it's a small line, the very last line of this book is, the dwelling has indeed changed. So the perspectives have also changed. Next, a little bit of a commentary on this narrative is a commentary, as I've said, on the disintegration of joint families, which gave rise to sociological problems. And even we have the problem now also of the equation between tenants, the housing problem, the equation between tenants and landlords, the housing problem, etc., etc. Now, finally, I would like to come to the translation of this book. I'm not saying anything about this book because this is an exclusive translation and it has been discussed by many of the panelists over here. So I'm keeping to myself with this. Well, as a translator, Tania as a translator, undoubtedly she is a brilliant translator. What I did first when Tania gave me the two PDFs, the Bengali and English, I didn't read the Bengali first. I read the English translation. Well, I breezed through it and stopped at the last line which I read just now. Well, this has that potency, that capacity to just keep you hooked. And this is the acid test of a good translator. And another thing, that there are three aspects which I just want to say about the translation of this book. That is, she of course has translated, Tania has translated this book, and this process of this translation has all true. She has transcended the boundary of language to bring out the distinctive voice of the author, unadulterated, and also to bring out the flavor of the story, which we all can enjoy, just like the original text, not as a translated text. Well, so I think much of the time has been, due to the time scarcity, I should stop now, and many more to come from you, Tania. Wish you all the best.
Thank you, Amita. And with that, we come to an end of this panel discussion on the two books launched this evening. And this, for me, was a rich learning experience from some of the best translators who are at present in this city, and also very experienced translators, and also those who are experimenting with different genres. And therefore, let me congratulate Tania once again, and hopefully we will be here to launch some other enterprise of yours, which I hope will not only be translation, it can be something else, even creative writing. So with those words, I would like to hand over the mic to the two competent curators of this particular event. Would you like to have this microphone, or that is working? Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Tania, and thank you all the panelists. You were absolutely brilliant, captivating.
you.